past, present and future. Conspiracy, one of the darkest words in human history. British Chancellor Reginald McKenna was also chairman of the Midland Bank in London. In 1924 he said,
"I am afraid that ordinary citizens will not like to be told that the banks can and do create and destroy money, and they who control the credit of the nation direct the policy of governments and hold in the hollow of their hands the destiny of the people."
For the past 300 years, men of different nationalities and many religious and non-religious backgrounds have joined forces and gained control over the world's money systems. They have established a superstructure of hidden power. These super-rich families are known as the international bankers. The key to their success has been to control and manipulate the money system of a nation while letting it appear to be controlled by the government. The net effect is to create money out of nothing, lend it to the government and then collect interest on it. A rather profitable transaction to say the least. Encyclopedia Britannica, 14th edition.
Banks create credit. It is a mistake to suppose that bank credit is created to any extent by the payment of money into the banks. A loan made by a bank is a clear addition to the amount of money in the community.
Lord Acton, Lord Chief Justice of England, in 1875 said,
"The issue which has swept down the centuries and which will have to be fought sooner or later is the people versus the banks."
Dr. Coombs was Governor of the Australian Reserve Bank and financial advisor to every Prime Minister, Liberal and Labor, for nearly 30 years. In a speech at Queensland University in 1954, he said,
"Any given piece of expenditure can be financed from one of four sources or a combination of these sources: new savings, accumulated reserves, money borrowed other than a bank, money borrowed from a bank. The last source differs from the first three because when money is lent by a bank, it passes into the hands of the person who borrows it without anybody having less. Whenever a bank lends money, there is therefore an increase in the total amount of money available."
October 78, Review, a monthly magazine from the Bank of New South Wales, makes it quite clear that banks create money.
For example, if a bank wishes to purchase a government bond in the market, it makes payment for it by crediting the seller's bank, thus increasing total bank deposits. The largest proportion of bank assets is in overdrafts and loans. When a banker grants a customer credit by overdraft, the bank opens an account in its books and gives the client the right to draw funds without first having to put money into the account. But bank deposits only increase when the customer actually draws on the account to pay his creditors.
In Australia, we have an institution known as the Reserve Bank, which began as a semi-government operation. Here is a quote from its own publication.
"The Reserve Bank has been banker to the Australian government since 1913. It is also banker to most of the state governments and a few large government instrumentalities."
Most of the money spent by the government is borrowed from the Reserve Bank, so the government debt is the initial loan plus interest. Some people still believe that the Reserve Bank is run by the government, but here again from the Reserve Bank's own publication.
The Reserve Bank Act came into operation on the 14th of January 1960, and from that date the bank has been a completely separated central bank with its own board, governor and staff.
The idea is to make it appear that the government controls the Reserve Bank, but in effect the Reserve Bank controls the government. Now how has this come about? The Magna Carta was one of the most magnificent documents ever written by man. Being based on the Bible, in essence it said,
"You have the right to do as you wish, to succeed or to fail, whichever you choose, but you may not interfere with the rights of others to do the same."
Regarding money, it stated,
"Anyone who charges or receives interest will be put to death."
Obviously this was not popular with certain moneylenders. About 1690, King William was short of money as a result of a war with France. Despite the law, the moneylenders demanded interest on a loan to the king. How could he pay it back? Increased taxes, of course. Does that sound familiar? The moneylenders also forced him to pass a law allowing them to set up a bank with exclusive power to create money out of nothing. Through this conspiracy, England's entire money system fell into private hands. In 1694, William Paterson obtained the charter for the Bank of England. In a boastful mood, Paterson said,
"The bank hath benefit of interest on all monies, which it creates out of nothing."
You might ask,
What's wrong with the banking system creating money?
for every $100 million they create out of nothing and lend to people and governments at, say, 10%, an additional $10 million is added to the debt every year. Where will the extra $10 million come from? Whatever your answer may be, the money for the interest does not exist. It will have to be created by a bank somewhere, and they will charge interest on that as well. The present structure of banking guarantees that every nation will always be in debt, and governments, good or bad, will be held to ransom by the bankers. Taxation in Australia in the early 1920s was only 2.5%. Today, direct and indirect taxation takes more than 50 cents out of every honest dollar that a person earns. And remember, this is to pay interest on money created out of nothing. Go into a modern bank and ask for a loan. You probably believe that the money or credit that you obtain is taken from other people's savings or fixed deposits. This is simply not true. Has your bank manager ever notified you that he has lent some of your money to someone else and now you have less money in the bank? Banks never lend the money they hold in deposits. All loans and overdrafts are new money created out of nothing at the stroke of a pen. They then charge interest on top. Very profitable. Banks offer interest on deposits as a smokescreen to disguise their operations. This book, None Dare Call It Conspiracy, is an excellent starting point for understanding the operations of the world's money power structure and how the international bankers have set up a conspiracy to create a one world rulership. It was a conspiracy that directed Brutus against Caesar in the Roman Senate on the Ides of March. It was a conspiracy that organised the assassination of President Lincoln in 1865. History is full of accounts of assassinations, secret combines, palace plots and betrayals over the centuries. Yet, despite this clear record, an amazing number of people scoff at the possibility of conspiracy. This segment is to show that the conspiratorial view of history, and especially recent history, is the correct view, and that there are secret and powerful combines at work today.
Power brokers in secret talks.
Each year, a top-secret meeting known as the Bilderberg Conference is attended by the richest and most powerful men on earth. This group has produced the last 3 American presidents, the last 3 Prime Ministers of Britain, the President of France, and Chancellor of West Germany. So let's see what this is all about. Bavaria, 1786. Acting on a tip from an informer, police raided the home of a prominent attorney named von Zwack. They seized documents and letters revealing that he was a high-ranking member of an extensive conspiracy called the Order of the Illuminati. Over the centuries, different forms of the word Illuminati, meaning the enlightened ones, have been used by many secret lodges and occult organisations. Most were primarily concerned with psychological and spiritual objectives, a proclaimed inner wisdom and mind mastery of the secrets of the universe. The conspiracy exposed in Bavaria, however, was entirely different. This Illuminati was founded by Adam Weishaupt on May 1st, 1776. He had been a student of the Jesuits, but he rebelled and started his own group in opposition. Weishaupt wanted to establish a world order. In his Illuminati, there are 8 levels from the outermost novice inwards to Rex or King. The king, of course, was Weishaupt himself, who had adopted the code name Spartacus. Weishaupt's followers were merely puppets enticed into front organisations. Today, people with a sincere desire to improve the world are attracted to welfare schemes and world brotherhoods. But Weishaupt said,
"These good folks swell our numbers and fill our money box. Set yourselves to work. These gentlemen must be made to nibble at the bait, but this sort of people must always be made to believe that the grade they have reached is the last."
But by the time a member had reached the level of presbyter or priest, the oath of absolute secrecy had become deadly serious. Only then was he allowed to see the real goal. It was the destruction of Christianity and religion to be replaced by humanism, the worship of reason. They, the enlightened ones, must destroy all independent governments and usher in a new world order, a one-world government. Some people call it the New Age. The Illuminati attracted many prominent men, both in government and finance, including the Rothschilds, who originally financed Adam Weishaupt. Some years later, an obscure intellectual named Karl Marx joined one of the front organisations which was known as the League of the Just. It later changed its name to the Communist League. In 1847, Marx was hired to write their policy statement for the public. It was called the Communist Manifesto. On the surface, the manifesto appealed to the workers of the world to rise up against their so-called capitalist exploiters, but it should be noted that the project was financed by a wealthy man, Friedrich Engels. Marx was considered so unimportant that his name didn't appear on the manifesto during the first 20 years of its publication. This information is available in old history books and encyclopedias. You won't find it in later editions where history has been rewritten. Here is a current edition. It's available in most left-wing bookshops. Karl Marx listed a 10-point program for taking over a nation.
Abolition of property in land and application of all rents of land to public purposes.
That is, the government will own your home and you will pay rent.
A heavy progressive or graduated income tax.
That is, if you are productive, you will be victimised.
Abolition of all right of inheritance.
If you have worked and been careful, your savings will be confiscated by the government.
Confiscation of the property of all immigrants and rebels.
By Marx's definition, you are a rebel if you are opposed to compulsory socialism.
Centralisation of credit in the hands of the state.
So there you have it. Get control of the nation's money system. All nations have a central bank. We have the International Monetary Fund and a World Bank. All this has happened in the last few decades.
Centralisation of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state.
We already have government railways, government shipping, Australia Post, Telecom.
Extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state. Equal liability of all to labour. Combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries.
Complete government control and ownership of all industry and production. You will have no say in who you work for, and certainly you won't be able to work for yourself.
Free education for all children in public schools.
Education is not free. Who pays for it? The government does, with your money. And government bureaucrats decide what your children will be taught. In many schools today, children are encouraged to study astrology and witchcraft under the guise of English lessons. Hard to believe? Get the tape on this subject.
60 years of communism and 100 million graves. Their discipline is to kill.
From 1831 to 1916, the so-called tyrannical czars executed only 997 people in 85 years. After the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, almost 2 million people were murdered in the first 6 years of their so-called liberation, and that was just the beginning. After 60 years, over 100 million people have been murdered.
Despite the concrete, the barbed wire, the savage dogs and merciless guards, East Germans keep on coming. The dash for freedom has never been harder, but East Germans continue to risk being shot, blown up, electrocuted and savaged by dogs to escape to the west.
Why does this so-called workers' paradise need barbed wire and bullets? The International Committee for the Defence of Human Rights reveals at least 200 forced labour camps currently in the Soviet Union. In Hungary and Poland, many of these man-proof enclosures were formerly lion parks and zoos close to major cities. Half the world is already under compulsory socialism. Let's see what's happening elsewhere. In recent years, we have seen the growth of an organisation called the World Council of Churches. Courier Mail, August 78, describes how this organisation has raised money from churches and used it to aid terrorists around the world. Millions of people are financially supporting this organisation. How many would continue to do so if they understood its origin and purpose?
Churches confirm guerrilla support. The World Council of Churches says its controversial grants to guerrillas in southern Africa are justified.
Here are some of the grants they had made to revolutionary groups up to 1971. Today, revolution is a multi-million-dollar business. Much of it is being financed by the World Council of Churches. Where does the money go that you put on the plate? Key figures behind the World Council of Churches include renegade ministers, lecturers trained in Moscow, sponsors of communist organisations and publication, and others with leanings towards atheistic socialism and a one-world government. The World Council of Churches claims to be Christian, yet many anti-Christian religions belong to it, even the Church of Satan. The World Council of Churches is an Illuminati front designed to water down Christianity and coerce people into a one-world religion. Another front organisation of the Illuminati is the American CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations. It is through this organisation and outwards through tax-exempt foundations, universities and government agencies that the Illuminati has dominated the United States for over 60 years. In Harper's Magazine, July 58, there was an article entitled School for Statesmen, written by CFR member Joseph Kraft. At the time of writing the article, Kraft boasted that the CFR membership included
the President, the Secretary of State, the Chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission, the Director of the CIA, the Board Chairman of 3 of the country's 5 largest industrial corporations, 2 of the 4 richest insurance companies, and 2 of the 3 biggest banks, plus the senior partners of 2 of the 3 leading Wall Street law firms. the publishers of the two biggest news magazines and of the country's most influential newspaper, and the presidents of the big three in both universities and foundations, as well as a score of other college presidents and a scattering of top scientists and journalists.
Here is a cabinet meeting when Johnson was president. We see the Postmaster General, Ministers of Agriculture, Labour, Health, Education, Welfare, people from the Treasury, and the United Nations Ambassador. Practically all the men here are CFR members. Most people have never heard of the CFR, yet it is the unseen government of the United States. This is an American $1 note. On the left is a symbol of the Illuminati. Apparently, it was taken by Adam Weishaupt from the occult symbolism of ancient history. This symbol is also used by the Freemasons, the Jesuits, the Rosicrucians, and similar organisations. It looks rather unusual, doesn't it? A pyramid without a capstone, an eye and a triangle. Today, the Illuminati appears to be controlled by the richest families in the world: Rothschild, Rockefeller, Warburg, Ford, Morgan, Schroeder, Baring, Hembros, Bosch, and the Dutch royal family. These people own the world's banking systems. They control most of the world industries. Example, Bayer Aspirin, Ford Motor Company, General Electric, General Motors, ICI, IBM, Kmart, Shell. At the bottom you see the words, the Great Seal, but this is not the seal of the United States. The Latin words above the seal mean
a new world order.
At the bottom of the pyramid you see the Roman numerals for 1776. This, of course, is the year of American independence. But is it a coincidence that it is also the year that Adam Weishaupt established the Illuminati, 1776? Around the world, communists, socialists and trade unionists celebrate May 1st. People in witchcraft celebrate May 1st. Satan worshippers celebrate May 1st. The Illuminati was founded on May 1st. Coincidence, or is there some common bond linking these organisations? Tapes are available on this subject. How many people in the May Day marches know what they're really celebrating? Here is David Rockefeller, chairman of the board of the CFR. The enormous wealth of the Rockefeller family has been accumulated by the simple process of owning most of the banks, including the Federal Reserve Bank in America. They also own the Chase Manhattan Bank, which is banker to the United Nations, and they own a surprising percentage of shares in our Australian banks. They control a large part of the world's industries, but more importantly, they control education through their tax-free foundations. They finance the Curriculum Development Centre in Canberra, which supplies textbooks and programs to most Australian schools. On the right is a list of some of the media they control. They own most of the daily newspapers in America and two of the big TV networks, NBC and CBS. It would take pages to list all the newspapers, magazines, radio, TV and movie companies controlled by the Rockefellers. But the Rockefeller empire is only a baby compared with the Rothschilds. Here is where the Rothschilds fit in, or should we say where everyone fits in with the Rothschilds. It was Lord Rothschild who said,
"Give me control of a nation's money and I care not who makes its laws."
What that really means is,
let the nation's leaders play their political party games, but when it comes to money, they will do as I tell them.
Another front organisation of the Illuminati began in 1883, founded by Sidney Webb and George Bernard Shaw. This stained glass window is in the Webb's home in England. It depicts Sidney Webb and George Bernard Shaw on the right, reshaping the world. These two men set out to achieve world control by subversion and infiltration into government and finance. Let's look at that coat of arms above the globe. FS, the Fabian Society. See the wolf in sheep's clothing? Obviously, these men were deliberately using falsehood and deceit to achieve their goal. The Fabian Society has a lot of influence and control in Australia. For example, most of the Labor Party chiefs are members of the Fabian Society. They're quite open about their plans to get rid of the states and socialise Australia. In 1901, the states created the federal government and gave it limited powers in certain fields such as trade and defence. But over the years, men seeking centralised power have abused the Constitution, so the central government now has power over the very states which formed it. Bob Hawke wants to abolish the states and introduce complete socialism. He is a member of the Fabian Society, but did you know Bob Hawke was on the Reserve Bank Board until 1981? Remember the meaning of Lord Rothschild's statement?
Let the nation's leaders play their political party games, but when it comes to money, they will do as I tell them.
The Reserve Bank Board tells Prime Ministers what to do. This is why, over the years, governments change, party labels change, but major policies do not. Most federal politicians and top public servants are members of either the Fabian Society or the Royal Institute of International Affairs, the Australian equivalent of the American CFR. The Bulletin, October 78.
David Rockefeller, chairman of the Chase Manhattan Bank, financier extraordinaire and member of the famous family, is to be Prime Minister Malcolm Fraser's personal guest in Canberra next month.
That was in November 78. In October 81, David Rockefeller came to Australia, this time with former KGB agent Henry Kissinger. Do you think that this team of bankers had anything to do with the mergers of the Australian banks? Remember Karl Marx's point 5?
Get control of a nation's money system.
Whoever controls our money system will control our resources.
Incidentally, the ANZ and the Wales are two of the 5 most profitable banks in the top 150 in the world.
Western nations consistently give away millions of dollars in grants and subsidise exports to communist nations. This book, National Suicide, documents the food, military equipment and technology flowing into Russia for decades.
The Russian war machine fed on American wheat, Western credits and technology.
In 1981, Poland owed $80 billion to private American banks. The banks appealed to the federal government for assistance because Poland was bankrupt. Naturally, the federal government paid the bill, and now American taxpayers are forced to pay a further $80 billion plus interest. It is well documented in government statistics and other publications that since 1917, communism has survived only because of massive support from Western governments using taxpayers' money. Now, the big question is why? Why would rich men and some Western politicians support a system of communism or socialism which would appear to be the path to their own destruction? The real issue is not capitalism versus communism as they would have us believe. It is government-protected capitalism which finances communism. The purpose is to eliminate free enterprise. After a man has far more money than he can possibly spend on pleasure, what is left to excite him? For those with the ruling class mentality, the answer is power, raw power over other human beings. Money can buy such power, but only to a point. After that, the name of the game is politics, and world politics is the ultimate game. These men are not truly capitalists in the classical sense of the word. They are rich socialists. They have gained their vast wealth by the gigantic fraud of the money system and monopolies. Monopolies can only exist with government protection to restrict and eliminate competition. Money alone does not motivate them. Many of them sincerely believe that a one world government is for mankind's benefit, but they have the expectation that from behind the scenes they will be the ones to rule. Big government is the conspiracy's life force. They want everyone working for the government or dependent on the government. But how do you sell big government to a people like us? In revolutionary terms, the tactic is known as pressure from above and pressure from below. Deliberately create problems, especially economic problems, and then offer solutions which will result in greater government control. If those who seek world control can organise mob violence, strikes, shortages, and also provide extensive news coverage, we will all throw our hands in the air and say, why doesn't the government do something? And what always follows? Yes, increased government power through new laws, supposedly to cope with the problem. Over the years, we have given huge grants to communist nations and equipped them with weapons and technology, so we have the constant threat of war. This is the meaning of pressure from above and pressure from below. Nationwide problems of unemployment, union unrest and inflation are deliberately engineered so that we will demand more government control of the economy. In the same way, the global threat of World War III is used to pressure us into accepting a one-world government as our only solution. The United Nations, one world police force, one world army, one world church, one world government. Conspiracies have deceived many people so well that they even laugh at the idea of any conspiracy. Some people would never admit to having been deceived, but there are conspiracies which have been cleverly programming the world for decades. We are told that world inflation is a serious problem, all the nations are deeply in debt. We are told that the world is running out of food, resources and fossil fuels. And yet, millions of fertile acres in many countries are not being used for food production. People are forced to leave their farms and crowd into cities to earn a living. The world is not overpopulated, just the cities. In 1967, solutions to world problems were suggested by an organisation called the Club of Rome. We are led to believe that this group of bankers, economists, ecologists and humanists is a collection of rather harmless fanatics. In 1972, they published a book, The Limits to Growth, Doomsday Predictions for Earth. They claim that every possible step must be taken to save mankind. Why is it called the Club of Rome? Is it because it's led by Italians or Catholics? No, it's not very keen on churches at all. The club was formed on a private estate outside Rome. The estate is owned by David Rockefeller. At the top, you see that David Rockefeller is chairman of the board of the CFR. On the lower right is Carol Wilson, one of the directors. Carol Wilson is also on the executive committee of the Club of Rome, so the CFR links the Illuminati directly to the Club of Rome. This report was not easy to obtain. It is an outline of their ideas on how they think the world should be run. They have used mighty computers to analyse the world's problems from every conceivable angle, and they have come up with a computer solution to save us all. Here is one way the state planners gather information. A special library in Brisbane stores information from a Landsat satellite. They photograph geographic features, mineral reserves, towns and buildings, very useful for map making, but today
officials at NASA and the Kremlin are getting a lovely little album together with snapshots of Australians going about their business. This latest threat to our privacy comes in the form of advanced satellites carrying powerful cameras which can focus on a golf ball while 160 kilometres above the Earth's surface.
Later on, we'll see just how far computer technology has progressed and how all this information about each of us is to be used. Here is Dr. Aurelio Pache, head of the Club of Rome. He says we must take a global approach. A new international order must be established, not only in the economic sphere, but also in social and political areas. At a meeting in Melbourne, Dr. Pache was asked,
"How many countries does your group advise?"
He snapped back the reply,
Many. Next question.
Dr. Pache, you advocate a new world order. How do you intend to get the power or authority?
Dr. Pache paused for a moment and said,
We're going to use shock therapy to get the people to accept it. I'm sorry, but you'll have to give up democracy if the planet is to survive.
The solution, in his eyes, is one of a benevolent dictatorship. Dr. Pache declined to explain shock therapy. In this book, Mankind at the Turning Point, the Club of Rome makes no bones about their intention. They plan to reorganise the whole world system, right down to maximum and minimum wages, where you live, what work you do, the size of your family, and everything else they think is for your own good. Here are some more of their books. Rio, that is Reshaping the International Order, is their textbook on how they intend to run the world. They put forward some very convincing arguments. They believe that they, the academics, the enlightened ones, must look after mankind. Many people in the Club of Rome and its front organisations are sincere. They really believe that they know what is best for the masses. We live in the greatest productive era that mankind has ever known. Australia could almost feed the world by itself if the farmers were allowed to produce without government interference. Production is not the problem. Telegraph, September 78.
More than 500,000 laying hens are to be killed to force up the price of eggs. The mass slaughter has been ordered by the New South Wales Egg Board as part of a scheme to reduce production.
The Egg Board, the Wheat Board, the Fish Board and so on are designed to restrict free enterprise and eliminate competition. This is point 7 of Karl Marx's plan to bring a country under socialism. This book, I Want the Earth plus 5%, explains how and why power is exercised over everyone through the money system. There is nothing wrong with money itself. It is a present mathematically impossible system which gives power. You've heard the saying,
Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
there is no man in this audience, in this country or on this earth who could be trusted as a world ruler. Even when they use computers, human beings make mistakes, no matter how sincere their intentions may be. I wouldn't trust this man, I wouldn't trust you, I wouldn't trust me with the kind of power that they will have. Nevertheless, through the Club of Rome, the Illuminati intends to establish a world rulership. They have divided the world into 10 regions. Region 4 includes Australia, New Zealand, Oceania, South Africa and Israel. Why Israel? Why does Bob Hawke make so many trips to Israel? The Club of Rome calls this their computer model. The 10 regions are practically in order now. Region 8 in Africa is to be a blacks-only area. When the white population has finally been removed from that region, the model will be complete. The system is designed to bring law and order, so that no one, and we mean no one, will be able to buck the system. Through the Club of Rome, the Illuminati is about to take over the world and run it their way, and people who don't understand what's happening and what is really behind it will hand the world over without second thought. Remember Dr. Pt1 said he was going to use shock therapy? In the next part, we'll investigate Dr. Pt1's shock therapy and we'll see how it's already being applied.